Okay, now we're entering part 2 of this Erectus Walks Amongst Us from Egyptologist7. If you haven't seen part 1, you need to go back and see it. We're caught right in the middle of the thing here. Hope it'll end in this part 1 or part 2, second part. We're talking about the Hofmeyr site in the sub-Saharan Cape. It's down near South Africa. It's not near where West Africans really were. It's kind of down near the Cape where South African white people live now, down that area. And it's showing that there was a Caucasoid form that was there at 38,000 years ago, or they try to talk about 40,000 years ago in some of the papers, and it just gives a fleeting note, but they've reinvestigated it a couple of times over and honed the date down to 38,000 years ago. Regardless, I want to say more than what she's going to underline here at this one and continue. It is that the proposed movement out of Africa through the Levantine corridor around 40,000 years ago did not occur, or is no material continuity to the present day. This is because first, in that period, the Eurasian haplogroups M and N had already evolved and spread out at continental level in Eurasia. This is connected with Cro-Magnon men and so on. And second, there is no evidence of any L-derived clades outside of Africa with a similar coalescence age to that proposed movement. Under this perspective, the late Pleistocene human skull from Hofmeyr, South Africa, considered as a sub-Saharan African predecessor of the Upper Paleolithic Eurasians, should better be considered as the southernmost vestige of the Homo sapiens' return to Africa. So this was a later paper coming out, and they've put all things together in this paper and said, you know, it's not going that way, it's going the other way. There was a bottleneck of genetics that kind of happened, and this was what popped that bottleneck and led to the modern humans that we have today. And that, so you'd say that some people were trying to say, well, here's like a kind of Caucasoid person, but he's in sub-Saharan Africa, so then that's when sub-Saharans turned into, and then they ran out of Africa real quick, and they're going, no, that's already Eurasian haplogroup people coming back in. And we're looking at the southernmost vestige, and where's that? So it's way down in the Cape. You can look up the Hofmeyr site. It's spelled Hofmeyr. So let's continue here. The Hofmeyr skull demonstrates that humans in Africa 36,000 years ago resembled those in Eurasia. Evidence that genetic diversity among the Africans today cannot be solely attributed to having a greater time depth on the African continent. Why? Well, there's a greater time depth on the African continent by Caucasoids from 315,000 BC leading on. You haven't been paying attention to part 1. If you haven't seen it, I'd say you can go back at this point and look at it. The earliest form that we're finding, even of a hominid form of Negroids, is about 9100 BC. And the earliest modern form we find is at 4400 BC at Asalarman. So a greater time depth in the continent would work the other way. In South Africa, 77,000-year-old dental characteristics are associated with Neanderthal and Upper European Homo sapiens. Yet 77,000 years ago, much more, almost double the age of the Hofmeyr site, the craniums that are found there in dental morphology and the way that teeth look and the way their dental patterns are and the crowns on them and so on, they work more with Upper Paleolithic European Homo sapiens, modern humans. Would make sense because they've been around this whole time. They're the only one that could be around this whole time if it's showing modern characteristics. They were the only modern humans at this time. Correct me if I'm wrong. So in Sibidu, South Africa, they found these teeth, and they're associated about 65,000 years ago, and pre-SB in 77,000 years ago industries, providing an important chronological and archaeological context to the finds. Well, what about them? Well, the crown dimensions of the two teeth from Sibidu lie between the modern human range of variation. Again, there was only modern humans around at that time. Would have been the ones who were talking about being Caucasoids. There was not a Negroid phenotype at that time, and they're telling you here that these teeth do not match them. I mean, it's plain to see, but they don't want to put it all together. They're put little pieces of the puzzle all throughout here, and this paper was from 2019. But these teeth are closest to Neanderthal and other Paleolithic human Homo sapien remains. That's one way they can tell, is from teeth, that they know the way the teeth form and everything off of it. It's the reason they don't have a clear conjecture of the way things go, and I'm telling you, there's a lot of hybridization that went on. But dental forms, prognathism, dental pattern, crowns, the way the teeth form, all kinds of things lead easily to make connections if you're in archaeology, especially the point these people are. Dental morphological analysis of sub-Saharan Africans show they are unique among the world's modern populations. What? This is another paper back from 1998, Ancestral Dental Traits in Recent Sub-Saharan Africans and the Origins of Modern Humans. And they were showing that, well, modern humans don't come out of sub-Saharan Africans because they have a totally different dental pattern than anybody else in the world, which the other ones are quite closely related to them. I've seen a tree on this, and it's like they're on this branch over here all by themselves that started way down here on the tree. It's just on teeth, but we can get into a lot of other concepts. Significant differences between the sub-Saharan folk and samples from North Africa, Europe, Southeast Asia, Northeast Asia, and the New World. Well, those are all Caucasoids, and then Amerindians, which are part Caucasoid. These traits are also present in dentitions of earlier hominids, as well as extinct and extant non-human primates. Other ancestral dental features are also common in these forms. So we're saying that, this is the same paper here. These traits that they have in their teeth are different, and they are very similar to other hominids and not modern humans, and even some non-human primates. Okay, so in their teeth though. So this suite is termed the Sub-Saharan African Dental Complex. Yeah, there's different ones. There's a Mediterranean complex we quite often talk about when we're talking about the Egyptians and Levantine people and people of the Mediterranean. Other common sub-Saharan features are also present in the various Plio-Pleistocene forms, including Australopithecines, Homo habilis, and Homo erectus, and archaic Homo. So, and of course this UM1 cusp, these are cuspids and molars and stuff that they're talking about. in teeth and which tooth they are. If you were a dentist, you'd know what they're talking about. Crazy dentists and archaeologists know teeth by numbers and letters. But common with Australopithecines, Homo habilis. So is this a hint to maybe who that unknown hominid was here? Here's one little picture here showing of it. It just started to go dark here, but finger of God here again. So here's the skull of Ingolobo, which they found, and that was the one that looks as closest to West Sub-Saharan Africans as possible. It's another connection they mentioned in there in Pygmies, but they used to live up here. All this used to be green at one time. All kinds of crazy things happened. But we used to think the earliest modern human Caucasoid form was right here at Herthu at 160,000 years ago in Ethiopia and the Horn of Africa. Or it might have been Kibish. But now we found Homo sapiens here in Morocco at 300,000 BC. Well, it's 315. But at this same point, you can see archaic hominid species in Africa and modern Eurasians contributed to genetic material to the ancestors of modern Africans. And that led to the modern forms we see today. There's a few different forms in that. And what's left today is what's been derived from it. Iwualiru's closest neighbor, which we talked about earlier, LH18, Ingoloba, shows a lack of neighbor joining clustering with specimens outside of Africa, including those which post-date the presumed out-of-Africa event. What does that mean? There is no Negroid stage in the development and emergence of non-Africans whatsoever. You can even think of Australoids and stuff and how they end up at that point, but that's a somewhat of convergence with maybe a similar type hominid integration that they had, but it's not similar enough to show up in genetics. They're not related to them. So there's no Negroid stage in the development of Asians, Orientals, Amerindians, Eskimos, Egyptians, North Africans, anybody really except for themselves. Black Africans were not the propagators of humans outside of Africa because black Africans simply did not exist at that point in time. If we say the out of Africa event happened at 70,000 years ago, they didn't exist at that time. They're within 9,000 BC. And hominids up until 4,400, so we're really not talking about the same thing, really, are we? Who do present-day sub-Saharans acquire their modernity from? Well, looking at another paper, evidence from Y chromosome analysis from a late exclusively Eastern expansion of the Bantu-speaking people, Y chromosome haplogroups contained within the E1B1A haplogroup, which is exclusive to individuals of the recent African ancestry, might have something to do with it, because E is not actually a Negroid haplogroup. Well, how does that work? Well, they're black. I understand that. But there's ways that you can breed with, like, their women and pick up being the male haplogroup, and then those males from that point on be the selected ones And slowly but surely, poof, there you go. Expansion of the Bantu-speaking people started around 5,000 years ago, or 3,500 BC. Modern-day eastern Nigerian and Cameroon, right? Those areas there. So they weren't all over the world. And E1B1A represents a recent spread in sub-Saharan Africa. How does it show a recent spread? Well, they acquired it during, and it caused the spread. It seems, with a little hiccup. Although the Bantu-speaking agriculturists may have replaced, to a substantial extent, hunter-gatherers in their path, they have also, in some places, coexisted and interbred with the original inhabitants, or a modern human. What? Some of this is in code a little bit, but not so much. TMRCA for EB1A as a whole estimated at 6175 or 6588 years before present, about 4500 BC. Oh, 4400 BC Asalar, man, just 4500. Well, the other one before that is like 55. Oh, so right into that slot right there. Ka-ching! Here we go. With the TMRCA for the youngest haplogroup of E1B1A8A estimated at 1100 to 1638 years before present. What? Yeah, there's actually a subgroup that's happened due to breeding back and forth inner colony and getting that going with other people that had slight other integrations that's left with some different subgroups from that same rippling effect, and it's only 1100 to 1600 years before present, so 500, 700 AD or after. It seemed kind of odd, but no, and archaeology is showing all this, and this information she's pulling together is archaeology, paleontology, genetics works, craniometry, dental work. It's amazing, isn't it? She must be commended. Haplogroup E descends from CT-M168, Eurasian atom. Well, I've always said haplogroup E descends from CT. Well, CT is what spawns E, but then all these other ones form off of that, and they've realized that it can't come through that way off of time, but now we're looking at all these people that out of Africa and how that forms. But she's got a logistics point that shows you here. M168, more ubiquitously, he could be seen as the Eurasian atom, the great grandfather of every non-African man alive today. The journey his sons, or the journeys taken by his sons and grandsons, defined the subsequent course of human history. Now, I know we talk about Adam in the Bible and stuff, and this is not the same concept. This would be if we were trying to find somebody genetically along the human line. Not somebody just 6,000 BC, because this well predates that. CTM-168 is Eurasian atom, ancestor to all non-Africans, including E-Africans. What? Well, CMT is host to E, so if Africans have E, which there is a lot that have been admixed to their point that they are now, if I can say this delicately enough to work for you to understand, E was the father of all of them, including E-Africans. How did this come about? When did it happen? Well, it happened real late in the scheme of things here, for right recently for them, if you will, but that's the way it works out. Another man talking about this here in another paper, Spencer and Wells in 2007, talking about haplogroups E, talking about the ancestral line of Adam, M168, said his descendants traveled to south to sub-Saharan Africa. What? Yep. He got around totally. We were just talking about the Hofmeyr site and so on. Let's continue. And this haplogroup dispersed eastward after that and then folded back over into Europe. Eurasian introducing haplogroup E to Africa, evidence that black Africans did not exist at the time of the supposed out of Africa event. It's pretty straightforward. I'm guessing I don't have to say very much at that one. How did E get introduced into the world? Well, it was from these other people from long before, thousands of years before they ended up getting it. Because non-Africans do not possess ghost populations, or that ghost population, DNA, we can surmise African haplogroups A and B similarly lacked it at the time of the supposed out of Africa event at 70,000 years ago, since the ghost population admixture event took place at around 43,000 years ago, approximately 30,000 years after the supposed out of Africa event. Yeah, so their integration that they had that left him with this MUC7 gene and this ghost hominid had gone on. They never made it out of Africa, and anybody that contains those genetics never made it out of Africa or North Africa or really East Africa and through the Horn until the late Bantu expansion, really. Let's continue. It's one of the things I had a secondary question on, but we're just going to let it roll. We propose the same scenario happened with mtDNA-L, which would have been mitochondrial Eve. And I missed the last one. It flashed a little too quick. 7P7, by the way. You need to give about a 4-second delay there. Somebody can, I catch it so I can keep it on it while I'm talking about it, but couldn't catch that with a pause. Archaic hominid integration in Africa contributes to functional salivary MUC7 gene, or MUC7 genetic variation. It has to do with your mucus and your saliva and spit. And you know how whenever they take those swabs, it looks like a Q-tip that's longer, and then you rub the inside of your jaw to do a DNA test? That's the way you do the simple ones. You know, you have to get a scraper or something to get the other test done a little bit better. DNA sample, if you will. But what's funny is they found it in that saliva that's right there in all of them. Integration from enigmatic African population likely contributed to the noteworthy genetic variation of the MUC7 gene, and integration in sub-Saharan African populations. Hammer and others in 2011 noticed this, and Jose and others in 2016 as well. So this is being found by a bunch of genetic papers and stuff, but few want to really touch it past this point, it seems. Our results showed a significantly higher than expected number of variants that are likely in linkage disequilibrium with each other in the MUC7 locus, compared with 1,000 randomly selected regions of the genome for African YRI populations, but not for Eurasian populations. In other words, no, they don't have it. We don't have the MUC7 gene. Anyone outside of Africa, including Australian Aboriginals, Amerindians, Eskimos, no one has it, but they have it. It's a different thing in their saliva than anybody else has, other than the fact they can see this 20% genetics different Non-Africans do not possess the ghost component that extant black Africans' ancestors acquired about 43,000 years ago. About 40,000 BC. You say 35, but we're going to go around there somewhere. Thus revealing the foundation of out of Africa as a sham. Yeah, the whole concept of out of Africa and the idea that you might have today, or that you might have been taught in a school in a kumbaya way, isn't in any way that it worked out at all either. For there was one people that we well can think of when we think of it that really never made it out of Africa. Here we're looking at another paper. Evidence of integration from unknown now extinct hominids in African groups is accumulating. More precisely, archaic integration has been estimated to be around 5 to 7.9% in Aruba, 2 in Khoisan and Baika Pygmy, and 2 in Hasda and Sandawe in Western Pygmy populations, so less in the Pygmy population. And that was probably from Bantu integration, because they have some of that. If you read up on Pygmies on Wiki, you'll be freaked out on what still happens to them to this day, but let's see. Specific candidate integration regions have been identified. For instance, a 20 kilobyte block found exclusively in sub-Saharan populations that covers the entire MUC7 gene. So, just something different, something that showed up, and I guess it showed up pretty easily whenever you're getting saliva swabs. We don't know whether this archaic hominid is a ghost, for which we have no physical record, or one we have found traces of already, such as Homo heidelbergensis, which may have evolved around 700,000 years ago. It's really intriguing question, says Sanakaraman. This was in another paper here in February of 2020 after they found this out. Well, see, the thing that is showing up is that regardless, the sub-Saharan Africans, West Sub-Saharan Africans, had an integration from a hominid that can date back as far as like that, more of a regression, if they were ever regressed past that point. But again, when we find all of the skeletons back at 25,000 years ago, nothing fits their mold. So there's got to be something else, or something like Lucy, or something that's around that you wouldn't think of instantly can interbreed with something that's like Homo erectus. But then that fact, it twists Homo erectus quite differently. And then it has another integration later from already modern humans that had already left Africa and come back in, as we showed earlier. Let's continue. There is no distinct division or dividing line between Erectus and Heidelbergensis, by the way. It's a name of a form. It's like whenever they say Demency, and it looks a little different, and there's a lot of forms of Homo erectus look different. It's just really a different form, it looks like, of that, something along that line. Late surviving populations of Heidelbergensis, Rhodesiensis, or Homo erectus are likely to be the source of these ghost integressions. The reason they call it a ghost hominid is we don't have the DNA yet at this point. We don't actually have the DNA of Homo erectus at all, any of them. With the new techniques we've developed, hopefully in the next few years we'll get that, and whenever we do, it'll start showing us more and more. If we can get a few of them from the different points, we're probably going to find out something radically different again. And like I said, again, they're hybrids themselves because they're so radically different than each other, to the point that it almost doesn't make any sense. Here we see a look at a way of humanity's tree, if you will. And Caucasoids are located in the tan area in the center of the tree, indicating that East Asians, which are going off this way, and Africans going up off that way, are descended from or receive DNA from a generalized Caucasoid stock. I talked about this a couple of times in a couple of my other videos, and this is another verifier, if you will. This simple tree, which I talked about in one of my other videos, which looks much like this, and I also talked about in our Melanesian video, or maybe I didn't put it in here. But up in your top left-hand corner of the picture that's on your left there, what we see is Mbutu pygmaeus right at the very tip corner, and then it comes out of that, and then there's Bantu, which is separate from Nilotic, which is separate than West African. And they all seem to show this. But oddly, the San, which are just out here, finger of God, don't seem to show it, and Ethiopians, because the East African complex is not related to the West African Sub-Saharan complex. The Pygmies have a relation to it, but we find from there, then you go into the Berber populations, and of course North Africa, and all this, and Danish and English and Greek and everything are real close goes together, and you're going to find Egyptian to be up under there too. But then starting to branch out this way is Dravidian and Indian. These are the people of India, Tibetan, and so on, Turkish. And then if we go this way, we get Kutchi and Eskimo, Amerindians, and their different forms of it here, right? But if we look at the branch as it comes down this way, we get Mongols, Samoyeds, Ainu, Japanese, Koreans. And if we come off of this, which is a branch off of here, Chinese, Polynesian, Australoids, Micronesians, New Guinean, and as far away as we can get from these people here is Melanesians. Recently did a video on Melanesians and how they had an affinity for Prince Philip and actually treated him like a god in some way, because I had this troll telling me that black people were Melanesians and there were all these different people, so I did the video about it. He got on there howling and homping about it. If he looks at this video, maybe he can realize just how far apart those two people, who you might think look kind of close alike, are as far apart genetically as you could possibly be. But it seems to come from a central Caucasoid stock. And then the variation why they're so far and different on the top left is because they're not from the same modern humans that the other people were that are the little slight branches on the bottom. There are no African SMPs and Y chromosomes in any of the non-Africans. Anybody that was on the south side of that thing doesn't have any of this effect. Now that you know who is not modern, guess who is modern at 3 times the date of Iruliru? Let's look at some other genetic information in archaeology here. Levantine cranium from Manot Cave, basically 55,000 years ago. The overall shape and discrete morphology features of the Manot 1 clavillaria demonstrate that this partial skull is equivocally modern. There's a modern Caucasoid there at 55,000 BC. So Manot ancestor of the Upper Paleolithic Europeans, dated to 54,700 years ago, described as being unequivocally modern, like you would recognize him today. If he was shaved upright and wearing the same clothes, you would notice nothing different about him walking down the street. as opposed to others that you probably would. And at this point, there is no comparison, actually. Mat Adi at 54,700 is modern, but Iwaliru at 13,000 years ago is not modern yet. In fact, it doesn't become modern until 4400 BC. So we're really looking at 50,000 years worth of difference. Think about that. But in that same thought, it's not like one was on a fast track that the same other one was on, if you'll follow me. A 28,000-year-old Cro-Magnon mDNA sequence differs from all potentially contaminating modern sequences. Yeah, this is one I've done a video about and I've referred to quite a few times. The Puglisi 23 individual carried mtDNA sequences that are still common in Europe. I believe it was U6, demonstrating a genealogical continuity across 28,000 years from Cro-Magnon to modern Europeans. In fact, after this was found out in 2008, they've kind of redone Cro-Magnon because they're not something that used to live. They're somebody who's been around for really almost close to 50,000 years, and they really haven't changed at all. In fact, their genetics are still here today. So we've got a Cro-Magnon man 1-2 at roughly 29,000 years old too, but genetic continuity demonstrated among Europeans for at least 28,000 years, by the way, versus 44. Well, here's another one showing you genome that they got from Pasteur Muniri. I believe this is a woman, 35,000 years old, Romanian skull. Researchers have successfully sequenced the entire genome from the skull of Pasteur Muniri, a woman who lived in today's Romania 35,000 years ago. Her high genetic diversity shows that the out-of-Africa migration was not the great bottleneck in human development, but rather this occurred during and after the most recent ice age. So the bottleneck actually happened differently, and then that idea of everybody coming to a modern form really happened much later for some of the people on the planet, and it was because of integration from already modern humans. There can be no other outcome at this point, really. So there was no out-of-Africa bottleneck. Rather, the Eurasians share affinities with pre-Negroid Africans before admixed with ghost populations. What? Well, all the people in Africa, they share affinities with Eurasians. And the difference in Africa is this ghost integration population of some hominid that was living in Africa that helped to spawn them forth in the first place. Again, there's no Negroid forms of everybody outside of Africa. It doesn't work that way. You look at the Homo erectus forms, even though we're referring to that quite often. So the 335,000-year-old Pasteur 1 genome was successfully sequenced, revealing substantial genetic diversity in Europe. Her genetic diversity is evidence that there was no bottleneck during the so-called out-of-Africa event. Instead, the diversity was retained until the last ice age about 10,000 years ago. Therefore, the difference in genetic diversity between sub-Saharans and non-Africans can no longer be explained away by the supposed bottleneck associated with the mythological out-of-Africa event. If out-of-Africa was factual, this is evidence that those who were migrating out would resemble those who returned, since they lacked that ghost population. genetics that current black Africans and only black Africans possess. Again, this idea that we all come from one thing, it looked like we proved at the first one, in the first part that we were looking at, that there's a divergence even at 2.1 million years ago. And that it looks like there were other things that were out of Africa that are other types of hominids. It could have easily led to modern humans that were out of Africa, such as Neanderthals and so on, leading to a totally different idea. Geneticists have been stating this much all along, though. All along they were saying things like this. The mitogene of a 35,000-year-old Homo sapiens from Europe supports a Paleolithic back migration to Africa. Well, people have been hinting at things like this for a long time. Of course, a lot of them are all looked at as being racist now. It's actually, you can't refer to anything or try to correct anything at all having to do with one certain population. They seem to be so butthurt about it that you can't speak or refer to it. But if you talk enough lawyer lingo over people's heads like this in genetic papers, you can easily show off the reality of things. If out of Africa was fact, then whatever migrated out of Africa was the same thing that returned, pretty much. These early populations did not contain that ghost component. Substantial migrations from Eurasia into Africa contributed to present-day African populations. We find evidence for substantial migration from the ancestors of present-day Eurasians into African groups between 40 and 70,000 years ago, predating the divergence of Eastern and Western Eurasian lineages. This event accounts for previously unexplained genetic diversity in African populations, but now it kind of shows up, and supports the existence of novel population substructures in the late Medieval Paleolithic. What are these novel populations? Well, it was these Homo erectus types that were still around that all of a sudden looked like they were like a half-breed out of nowhere, a Homo erectus thing. And what is that? The out of Africa event is more complex than previously appreciated. Yeah, it gets quite complex, doesn't it, people? It's not some little lineage and some little tree, and I see the little branches and limbs. It's a whole lot radically different, leading to all the different people we have on the planet today, and this revealing a lot about one of them, and a lot about another's, and really about everybody. High rates of migration from descendants of the out of Africa event, non-Africans, to Africans, but not in the opposite direction, in the period of 30 to 70,000 years ago, corresponding to the late Paleolithic. So here's another paper here that was written, and I don't see the date on it, but irregardless, the contribution of this admixture event to extent African genetic variations is substantial. Approximately a third of ancestral lineages trace their ancestry through the Proto-Eurasian population. These are people of the Niger-Cotophonian group, Nilo-Saharan groups. So both of these, Nilotics and Bantoids. There's other information on Khoisan themselves too. Egyptologist7's already made papers about them. Looks like we're going into part 3 here, people. We don't have much time left though, so part 3 will be a small one. It's going to be in your top left-hand corner here in just a second. And we'll go on from there. We'll stop it at the next picture here. And we'll see you there.